Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bubbs on Sports podcast. Today is Wednesday, April 3rd. Hope everybody is having a good day so far and had a good rest of their Tuesday yesterday. We've got a lot to get into today on the podcast as we've got some breaking blockbuster NFL news to get into today to open up the pod. We'll also get into some other New York sports topics as well later on. Apologies for no podcast yesterday. We were back in action today. We'll have pods the rest of the week. I also had a Jets podcast up yesterday, In the Trench with Gang Green, wherever you get your podcast audio platforms only. So definitely go check that out if you haven't already. We've got some big news in the AFC East as we have a blockbuster trade. Stefon Diggs gets dealt from the Buffalo Bills to the Houston Texans. We will discuss that, give you both perspectives, the Bills' perspective, the Texans' perspective, and of course, how it impacts the New York Jets and the rest of the AFC East. We'll also get into, we'll recap the Yankee game last night. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But the second topic of the day, I've done this a couple different times. I figure now is probably a good time. We are in the month of NBA and NHL playoffs starting. Of course, baseball season is right in the beginning of it. The heart of the season will, the grind of 162 is just beginning. And with football season still a little ways out, of course, the draft is still got to come. You've obviously got all your off-season workout stuff and all your off-season workout programs. So we're still a little, a couple months away from the actual start of training camp and that excitement building. But I thought today, with the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs nearing, New York luckily having at least two teams, possibly three, if the New York Islanders make a late push here, potentially in the playoffs, two in the NHL, one in the NBA. The Nets, while they're not mathematically eliminated, are pretty much just about dead. It would take a lot for them to make a comeback to get the final spot, the 10th seed, the final spot in the playoff, and jump the Atlanta Hawks. So I want to give you my top 8, which teams in New York right now are closest to a championship at number 1, and then what team is furthest from a championship, and of course everything in between. So we'll get to that here in the second topic. And then, of course, we'll recap the Yankee game from last night. The Yankees lose their first of the season. They will look to get the series win in the rubber game today with Rodon on the bump against Morel Kelly. Mets rained out. Gary Cohen with a funny reaction last night on the SNY broadcast. So they got rained out. They'll be back today. They'll also have a game tomorrow, which will be made up from last night's, Tuesday night's rain out. So the Mets still got 2 games left here against the Tigers before they head to Cincy for their first road series of the season. But we got to start today with the NFL. And I was talking to somebody earlier today, and the minute this news dropped, at about 10 a.m. Eastern this morning, around that time, 10:30, probably more so around there, 10:40-ish, when the news officially dropped, this is why, before we get into the deal, before we actually get into what this means for both teams, what this means for the Bills, Texans, Jets, everybody involved, everybody that is impacted in this trade one way or another. This is why the NFL is king. You get a blockbuster deal like this at 10:56 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on a random Wednesday morning in the beginning of April. We are still a couple weeks away from the NFL draft. Free agency has kind of died down. And unlike other sports where you have that period of nothing going on, the NFL, there always seems to be something that happens at the most random moments that just sends shockwaves across all of sports. Even if you're not a diehard NFL fan, this is a massive move. This is one of the best receivers in football getting moved to the Houston Texans, who are one of the better young up-and-coming teams in the NFL. A massive move. So just to open up there, this is why the NFL is king. 24/7, 365, there is always something that can happen. There is always something happening. And today, it was a blockbuster deal for Stefon Diggs and the Houston Texans as they now go all in. What a move for them. It feels like the rich in a way got richer with this move for Houston. So to break down the trade details, the Texans get Stefon Diggs and a 2024 6th and a 2025 5th round pick. On top of that, the Bills get a 2025 second-round pick. Of course, this was according to Adam Schefter, who broke the blockbuster news. We'll start here with the Bills' perspective, and then we'll get to the Texans' perspective because I'll tell you what, this is something that's been interesting with the Bills here for a little while. It seems like, as we always say, the old saying is, where there's smoke, there's fire. You go back to last offseason and even during the year before that, last season into last offseason, you heard some of these reports about potentially Diggs being unhappy in Buffalo, there being maybe a little bit of a rift between him and Josh Allen, maybe some issues in the locker room. And I think a lot of people, a lot of Bills fans, a lot of the just NFL people, myself included, I'll admit, I never really thought this would ever get to a point where he would actually get dealt from the Buffalo Bills and he would actually move on and get traded elsewhere in this window that they are in now, in this Josh Allen prime of his career window. I never fully expected this to happen, but it seemed like for a while there, a lot of people kind of just pushed it aside and you said it was just the media trying to create drama, trying to create nonsense, trying to create random headlines for no reason. Nothing happens last offseason. You go into the regular season. Bills, of course, struggled. Down the stretch, they win some games. They get to the playoffs. We all know, of course, they beat Pittsburgh, losing the divisional round to Kansas City at home, all of that stuff. And down the stretch, Diggs didn't have a very, very big role. Look, Stefon Diggs was not the same player he usually was last year. I think we all know that. Down the stretch, Stefon Diggs, whether he was playing hurt or whatever it was, whether it was something off the field, whether it was whatever it was, maybe he was unhappy, maybe there was something with him and the coaching staff, because again, for a while, there have been reports that have come out of Buffalo, that have come out of Orchard Park, that stated that Diggs might have been unhappy and there might have been a little bit of a rift and there might have been some things going on that behind the scenes that maybe it wasn't as perfect as it seemed on the outside, where the Bills are winning games, they're making the playoffs every year, Diggs and Allen have a good connection, all that stuff. So he was really a non-factor down the stretch. And here we go this offseason. You hear the reports coming again. Diggs last night tweets at a fan. This felt like the cherry on top. Tweets at a fan about how saying that Josh Allen's or Diggs isn't crucial to Josh Allen's success. And Diggs tweets back at him, "You sure?" with a question mark. And that's something else with Stefon Diggs. He's had multiple cryptic tweets on social media. Now, that's just the way we live in. That's the age that we live in with social media. Whether it's a player deleting all of his stuff from his social media. We've seen players before, if they're a member of a team, they'll delete everything that they have from that team to create drama. It's just the way we live in. Players oftentimes put their frustrations out on social media. It gets everybody along that fan base, along the NFL media going crazy. And the same thing happened last night. And that was not one instance. That was multiple instances. And then this morning, you get the deal. Diggs goes to Houston. So really, for a while here, it seems like this was a marriage that was little by little fracturing between Buffalo and Stefon Diggs. Even with that being said, if I'm a Bills fan this morning, I would be furious at what Brandon Beane and the Bills front office got in return for a guy that, since he has come to the team, has been a massive piece. The reason why one of the main reasons why you've dominated the division since Tom Brady left New England. That 2020 season and beyond, the Bills have dominated the AFC East. They've been in the conversation every single year, even in a down year for Stefon Diggs last season. He finished 7th in the NFL in receptions. He finished 13th in yards. He finished tied for 8th in touchdowns with 8. He had 1,100 yards. He had 107 receptions. Even in a down year, Diggs was still easily a top 10 receiver in football. And you got back a 2025 second-round pick? Not even a second-round pick this year, a second-round pick next year. And oh yeah, on top of that, you had to give up a 2024 6th and a 2025 5th. So you had to give up 2 picks and Stefon Diggs, and all you got back was a second-round pick. For Nick Caserio and the Houston Texans, you should be fired up right now. If you're a Buffalo Bills fan, you should be furious. You shouldn't necessarily be furious at the fact that Stefon Diggs got dealt, because if you're a Bills fan, you probably, in a way, saw this coming. Again, for a while, for the last year and a half, it seemed like there was this marriage was beginning to fracture. It seemed like there was some holes. Whether it was Diggs' side of things that was causing problems, or whether it was Buffalo, whether there really was an issue between him and Josh Allen, whatever it was, you shouldn't be totally surprised. But to only get back a pick in the second round that is next year, that won't even help you this year, is ridiculous. So if I'm a Bills fan, I am furious at what they got back in this deal. For even in a down year, this guy was still a top 10 receiver. And not even just Diggs. Everything else that the Bills have had to move on from this year, and I know a lot of it's been because of the salary cap. But your window is like now. Like their window to win is now. And key players that are off for the Bills this year. Diggs is gone. Gabe Davis is gone. Trey White's gone. Poyer's gone. All of these guys are gone. Now, of course, a lot of it was the salary cap. But when you look at this deal for the Bills, they have to absorb $31 million in dead cap. So this deal hurts them in a variety of different ways. From a salary cap's perspective, and of course, they're now losing their number one weapon, and they're not getting anything in return. You know, if it was a first, let's say, for next year, or a 2024 second, like this year, you can kind of, you can understand that. But something that won't even help you this season. You had to give up picks and Diggs. You absorb a $31 million dead cap hit. And now you're left with Curtis Samuel and a bunch of Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir. Neither are capable of filling the shoes of Stefon Diggs. It's basically Josh Allen throwing to nobody at this very moment. So back to the dead cap hit. So by trading Diggs, the Bills take on the $31 million dead cap, meaning they are absorbing an additional $3.2 million cap hit than they would have if they kept Diggs on the roster. So Rich Cimini of ESPN, of course, covers the Jets. The Bills were so desperate to get Diggs off the team, it's costing them more in cap space to not have him than to have him. To not have him, it's $31.1 million. To have him, it's $27.9 million. That, I think, shows to you that there was obviously something there. There's not many teams in the NFL that would be this desperate, this willing to trade their number one receiver for nothing. And maybe that was the Bills' perspective too. Maybe there was so many things that were breaking apart between him and that locker room and him and that organization that maybe they just had to get him out of there. And even if it wasn't for much, they just had to. Maybe that was the case. Again, nobody's inside those walls except Brandon Beane and that front office and that coaching staff, but that is a record amount of dead money for a non-quarterback. I mean, the amount they're taking on after having to do all these moves to finally get under the cap, they deal Diggs and they have to absorb this much against the cap. It's very questionable from that perspective. So, again, you look at this receiving core now for the Bills, it's a lot of questions. You know, I didn't love the Curtis Samuel move to begin with. I thought they probably were better off keeping Gabe Davis. I know he's streaky, but statistically, he's been a better receiver throughout his entire career than Curtis Samuel. So I thought you were downgrading there. You also now get rid of Diggs. You now look at this receiving core. It's Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Mac Hollins, Justin Shorter, KJ Hamler, Andy Isabella, Brian Thompson, Tyrell Shaver. So not very good at all. My next thing here for Buffalo is, all right, you move on from Diggs. That tenure is done. It's over. But now all the pressure is on because Bills fans are already frustrated with Brandon Beane. Now the pressure is already on Buffalo, is completely on Buffalo. Brandon Beane, this will be one of the biggest picks that he has made as the general manager of the Buffalo Bills, is this pick this year. 28th overall. If they're going to take a receiver, they've got to hit on this receiver. Because I think the Bills' perspective here is, all right, you move on from Diggs. It seemed like both sides were okay with it. You don't get much for him. You absorb that cap hit. You better have a good plan in place to get somebody else in. Now, most likely that's 28th overall pick. I wouldn't throw out the window. Maybe Buffalo now moves on from Diggs and maybe they strike a big trade to bring in T. Higgins to replace him as your number one guy, which would obviously be a monster move for Buffalo. Maybe that's what happens. I don't know if they'd be willing to do that. I don't know if Cincinnati's actually going to trade. Again, T. Higgins requested a trade. That doesn't mean Cincinnati's going to want to trade him. Cincinnati's perspective as well. Are they really going to want to trade T. Higgins to Buffalo knowing, that they're going to probably run into them potentially in the playoffs this year, right? Are you going to really want to trade away, or are you going to try and work something out? So I think that has some stuff to do with it as well, which is why I think this move was also so surprising that Diggs didn't maybe go to like the NFC to the Cowboys, that the Bills trade him within the AFC to a very good team in the Houston Texans that are only getting better, and they will play Houston this year. So they basically made one of their opponents this season a whole lot better. It's not like they let him go to an NFC team that they won't see until if they get to the Super Bowl and both teams are there. So that's another thing that's questionable there. But look, now it ultimately comes down to pick 28. And if you want to try and look at this from a glass half full perspective for the Bills, which I don't really think there is much of, the Bills have gotten a lot worse this offseason. There's no other way to put it. And now losing Diggs, you're only getting worse. But the Vikings did deal Diggs to the Bills, right? And then after that, they got Justin Jefferson. So they moved on from Diggs. They used one of their first-round picks to get Justin Jefferson, and they replaced him with an even better receiver. If the Bills, if that's their mindset now, maybe this is what happens. Diggs gets dealt. You have the 28th overall pick. Now you have to go out and try and find your Justin Jefferson, somebody that can replace him and potentially be even better. Because no matter which way you want to spin it, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, both of them combined do not fill Stefon Diggs' shoes. Like we mentioned, Diggs in a down year last year was still a top 10 receiver in the NFL. And I understand he wasn't much of a role last season, down the stretch when they were winning. But over 17 games, you're not going to win many football games, especially in that division where you have the Jets defense. When you still have to play teams like the Texans. In the AFC, in that conference, you're not going to win many football games with their receiving core the way it's currently constructed. So, 28, whether that's a Troy Franklin, a Keon Mitchell, and a Donnie Mitchell, or a Keon Coleman, rather, and a Donnie Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr. Do the Bills now get desperate and potentially trade up? I don't know if Brian Thompson Jr. would fall to them. I love Brian Thompson Jr. I think he's going to be an excellent receiver in the NFL. I don't know if Buffalo would be willing to go up for him. I don't think Brian Thomas Jr. will fall all the way to 28. Do the Bills get desperate? Do they trade up? Do we see a blockbuster trade where the Bills trade all the way inside the top 15 and take a Brian Thomas Jr., maybe somebody like an Odunze falls or whatever? But most likely, I think you're probably picking from the categories of, a Ladd McConkey, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, Keon Coleman, a Donnie Mitchell, those late day one, early day two guys. Lots of pressure because you have to hit on that pick. If you don't hit on that pick, this whole Josh Allen window with the Bills, it's over. It's closed. Because now you technically could waste the next 2 seasons here if you don't hit on that draft pick. And he's got to develop quickly, too. There's also a lot of pressure on that guy because he's got to develop fast. It can't be a 3-year developmental process when their mindset's kind of this win now mode. And I've also heard this, too. Look, I don't think Josh Allen's... the Bills in a way are retooling here. It feels like they're retooling. Maybe they're recognizing that core that they, with the Poyers, the Trey Whites, the Diggs, like that core of guys, Gabe Davis, obviously wasn't getting it done. It feels like they're going through a little bit of a retool where this season could be a little bit of a rebuild. They restock a receiver, get a younger receiver, let him develop. Whether or not they make the playoffs or whatever, maybe more of a 9-10 win team this year. You kind of retool and go, you kind of get back after it again all in 2025. Maybe that's the Bills thing here. You just kind of wonder what their thinking is among all of this. It's interesting. But I've also heard stuff about the Josh Allen. Now people are like, oh, is Josh Allen going to get traded? That's not happening. I know some people are like, oh, Giants, Josh Allen. That is not happening. I do not see a world where Josh Allen's getting dealt. There's no chance that is happening. I don't think the Bills are completely tearing it down. It just wouldn't make sense because it's not like they have a top 10 pick. It just wouldn't make sense. It's not happening. So, Diggs out in Buffalo. Now you move on here to the Texans. Look, the Bills have gone significantly worse this offseason. Significantly worse. You go to the Texans side. They're all in, man. I mean, this Texans team, I think, you can make a strong case it's got to be the favorite for the AFC. You look at this core. Stefon Diggs you now add. Joe Mixon you added. You add that to Dalton Schultz, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, the rookie of the year on offense in C.J. Stroud. You look at some of the players on defense. They obviously added Danielle Hunter. They already have Will Anderson, Derek Stingley. I mean, this team is stacked, and they're only getting better, right? You expect Tank Dell to take another step. You expect Stroud to only get better. You know, Stroud's a special player. You add Stefon Diggs. Nico Collins only getting better. This team is legit. The Texans, seriously, Nick Caserio and that front office deserves so much credit. You could not, if you paid people to go to Texans games 2 years ago, there would not be many people that would actually go, even if you paid them to go. That's how bad that the state of affairs were for that organization. And what they did was they brought in DeMeco Ryans, culture-changing head coach. They drafted C.J. Stroud, number 2 overall. One of the best rookies seasons we've ever seen in NFL history. We have not seen a rookie quarterback that good in a very long time. And what those two did together, won a playoff game, went into Baltimore, of course lost, but got to the divisional round in year 1. And they went into this offseason knowing a couple different things. They needed to still, needed another receiver around C.J. Stroud, get him a running back, add some pieces on defense. That's exactly what they did. Danielle Hunter they added on defense. Now they strike a trade for Stefon Diggs. You already have Tank Dell. You already have Nico Collins. I think the Houston Texans are the favorite in the AFC right now. I really do. Because they're young. They've got a good mix of young talent, veteran talent. C.J. Stroud is arguably already, some people think, already implemented himself as a top 7, top 5 quarterback in football. And he now has Stefon Diggs. I mean, it is crazy how talented this team is. And also, they got to the playoffs last year. It's not like we're talking about a team that won 6 games last year, showed some signs, but won 6 games, and now all of a sudden we're talking about them winning 12, 13 games. No, this team won 10 games last year. This team easily wins 12, 13 games this year. Easily. 12, 13 games could easily win the AFC. They're loaded. Good for Texans fans. They've been through a lot. The end of the Deshaun Watson era, you had that couple-year window where there was nobody at those games. They were winning nothing. Terrible, terrible football. Sad state of affairs. You go into last year, you get a head coach and a quarterback that rejuvenate the fan base, just revive it from the dead. And now this team has got to be at least a top 3 or the number 1 team to win the AFC. Stefon Diggs, C.J. Stroud, unbelievable combo. And you have Tank Dell, Nico Collins. You have a tight end in Dalton Schultz, who, of course, was Stroud's best friend last year, a good safety blanket to have for a young quarterback. Loaded, loaded, loaded. And, hey, you want to call this a fleece? Yeah, it's a fleece. All they had to give up was a 2025 second-round pick for a top 10 receiver. Not many times do you see that in the NFL. Not many times. But we saw it this morning in this blockbuster deal. I mean, they're obviously the favorites in the AFC South, no doubt. Favorites in the AFC, I think they would probably be my favorite. I think they, talent-wise, look, they're definitely going to be more talented than the Chiefs. Definitely are more talented than the Chiefs. I know the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. I get that. And the Chiefs, everybody's always going to say, the Chiefs number 1. And I get that. Right? You can never bet against Mahomes. But the favorites to be the 1 seed in the AFC, right? To get that first round bye, to make a run. It feels like this team's floor is at least the AFC title game. It really does. I mean, this team is more talented, I think, on paper than the Ravens were last year. And I know they knocked them out, but the floor, I think, has got to be AFC title game for this Texans team. That's how good they are. That is how good. And again, it's not like they're all in 1 year or 2 years. They are all in, but this is just the beginning. They've got a good mix of young guys. Stefon Diggs, still a top 10 receiver, still got some gas left in the tank. You add Mixon. You've got good pieces on defense. Danielle Hunter, veteran. Will Anderson, second year. Derek Stingley, third season, right? Just a good mix, good coaching. A lot of really, really good things coming out of Houston. Credit to their front office. They've turned this thing around in about a year. In about a calendar year, this time last year, you didn't really know where they were headed, right? They didn't have the number one pick. C.J. Stroud, they settled for him in a way, I guess, so they had to settle for him because Bryce Young was the number one. They got C.J. Stroud. Like this time last year, you didn't really know what direction Houston was heading in. You knew they were going to take a quarterback. It was a rookie head coach. There was still a lot of questions around the franchise. Fast forward a year later, after a 10-win season, winning a playoff game, now you add Stefon Diggs. I mean, this is how you build a winning team. Texans have clicked all the right buttons. As long as they stay healthy, massive, massive threat. One of the most talented teams in the NFL. So, from a Texans perspective, you've got to be fired up. From a Bills perspective, I think you've got to be very, very frustrated at what they got in return. But now it's a wait-and-see game. How are they going to pivot, right? Minnesota pivoted and got Justin Jefferson. Is that the road the Bills are going to take? Are they going to find their version of Justin Jefferson at 28th to replace Stefon Diggs? It's up to Brandon Beane in that front office. But there are some now questions in Buffalo after an offseason where they've done a lot of subtractions and not many additions. Now, from the AFC's perspective, look, I think, call me biased, whatever, I think this is the Jets' division to lose now. I really do. I think the Jets have to win the division. I think they should win the division. They've done the most in the division. New England's irrelevant. The Bills currently constructed are probably a third-place team. But Miami hasn't done a whole lot. They've done more subtractions than additions, similar to Buffalo. The Jets have done the most in the division. If they are healthy, this Jet team should win 11, 12 games and walk away with this division, no doubt. So that's the way I look at it. I think it's the Jets to lose. I think you look at this roster, the Jets are the most talented roster, hands down, in this division. If they're healthy, there's no reason they should not take home the AFC's crown. So to keep it short and sweet, that's the way I view it from the AFC East. It's really the Jets-Dolphins, but I think it's the Jets. Take the phantom away from it. Take the bias, even if you hate Aaron Rodgers, even if you hate the Jets. You cannot tell me that roster is still not the most talented in that division. Top 5 defense. You look at the offense, you've got Breece Hall. They reinforced the offensive line with Hall of Fame left tackle, protecting Aaron Rodgers' blind side. You brought in Mike Williams. You still got the draft. Aaron Rodgers, while there's a lot of doubters, when Aaron Rodgers is doubted, what does he do? He dominates. A couple years ago, he was doubted, and he won back-to-back MVPs. So keep doubting Aaron Rodgers. It only adds fuel to his fire. When Aaron Rodgers has a chip on his shoulder, he has a lot of success. And that's what he's entering this year, with a massive chip on his shoulder. New England is still irrelevant. No Patriots fans. The division is not yours now. Still a 5-win team. 4-win team at most. At most. 3 maybe. Maybe 0-17. I would be on board for that in New England. Always love. I love how the division now is 3 teams talking points. New England is so irrelevant. It's so sweet. You got to love it. Jets, Dolphins, Bills fans, right? Don't like each other's teams. But we can all agree on one thing, and that's New England being irrelevant. It's one thing we love. But now I think it's the Jets division. That's the way I view it. So a crazy, crazy day in NFL land. Overall, tough day for Bills fans. Tough day for the Bills. Big day for Texans fans. And for the AFC East, especially Jets fans, you got to feel now pretty confident about this team winning the division. Really confident, actually. So now we move on here, like I mentioned, to open up today's program. Right. It's April. The NHL playoffs start in about 2 weeks. NBA playoffs as well, pretty much in about 2 weeks. A little less than that if you want to count the play-in. But the real 7-game series start in about 2 weeks there, April 20th for the NHL NBA. Of course, the Rangers and the Knicks will be in. The Knicks haven't officially clinched yet. I know they've been a little bit of a rough stretch here, still trying to find ways, still trying to get healthy. They obviously lost to Miami last night. They're only actually 2 games up in the play-in, so the Knicks do still have some work to do, but they're going to be in the playoffs. I still think they're going to be in the play. I don't think they're going to lose their spot and end up falling into that 7-seed play-in situation where Miami jumps them. I don't see that happening. I still think they'll be in the playoffs, one of those top 6 seeds. We'll see how it all plays out. But Rangers have already clinched. Knicks are very close to doing that. The Islanders have still some more work to do. The way things are currently constructed, they obviously won last night against the Chicago Blackhawks. It seems like the Islanders, the way things are, right as the fan base stops believing, they pull you right back in, which is a lot of times what these organizations do, what these teams do, is right when you're like, oh, season's over, they find a way to suck you back in, and that's what the Islanders have been doing all year with their fans. 85 or 75 games in, they've got 7 games left. They're 1 point out of that final wild card spot in the East. Capitals currently hold that spot. Then it's Detroit. Then it's Islanders. Now, the only thing with Capitals, though, is they've got the game in hand on Detroit and the Islanders. Detroit's got 82 points. Capitals do as well, but the Capitals have played 1 less game. They've got 8 games left. Detroit and New York both have 7 left. You look at the way other things are. Pittsburgh's behind them there, 79, so they're 3 points back. And then it gets into Buffalo, New Jersey. Those are more of your long shots. Buffalo at 77 points, New Jersey at 76 points. Those are more of your, you got to win out. You've got to have a whole lot of different things to happen to try and find a way to squeak in. So mainly it's a 4-team race. It's Washington, Detroit, New York, Pittsburgh. Really, Pittsburgh's still kind of on the outside. When you look at the actual teams over 80 points, it's really Washington, Detroit, Islanders with Pittsburgh with more of an outside chance, although Pittsburgh's got a big game against the Capitals coming up tomorrow night. If they win that game, they get within 1 point, then things can really get interesting. But for now, those are the way things are currently constructed. Rangers, of course, still the top of the league with 104 points. They've already clinched. So what teams are closest to a championship? I've done this a couple times. I like to do it kind of this time of year because, of course, NHL playoffs, NBA playoffs are right in the heart of it, right near it, about 2 weeks away. 7, 8 games, regular season games left for each of the respective teams in each league. Then you've got baseball season just starting, football season, post-free agency, drafts around the corner. A lot of times, depending on what you've done in the offseason, a lot of teams, a lot of fans start to feel confident about their team, right? Still a couple months away from training camp and all that stuff, but you're kind of in that zone right now where you start to kind of see where you believe NFL teams will rank. MLB, of course, already started. Yankees off to a hot start despite the loss last night. Mets look terrible. So I feel like this is a good time. What teams are closest to a championship in New York? So I rank them 1 through 8. I'll be honest, there was a couple of them that were tough. The bottom's tough. I thought the top 3 were pretty easy. The bottom was a little tough. I mean, I know who's last. Last is obvious. You probably know. I've probably put them last year. But here we go. Number 1, New York Rangers. They're the closest in my eyes. And like I said, too, if baseball or basketball and hockey, they have a little bit of advantage because the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup come before, of course, the Super Bowl and the World Series. So even though you might think, the Yankees are going to win it all this year, technically the Rangers are ahead of them because the Stanley Cup happens before the World Series, way before the World Series, of course. So that has part of it. But the Rangers, I still think, are number 1. You want to call me biased because I'm a Ranger fan. I'm not a Knick fan. Fine. Call me biased. I genuinely don't care. You know my opinions on the show. Give them non-biased. I give you legitimately how I feel. The Rangers, 50 wins this season. Top of the NHL in points. Could be on their way to the President's Trophy. I believe their window is to win right now. You go into last year. You thought that last year was it, but they brought in too many pieces with Patrick Kane, Vladimir Tarasenko, too many guys with the pass-first mentality, not shooting, too many East-West guys, not enough North-South. Rangers are playing much better of a North-South game. Igor, despite the loss the other night to the Penguins, which was a more desperate Penguins team, Igor's finding his groove. He's played so much better over the last couple months than he did prior in the season, really since February. Igor has been great. All February, March. Kind of as the Rangers started heat up again after a really bad January, the Igor has also heated up and has played like that Vezina type winner that we've seen him play like before. Ultimately, with the Rangers, it's going to come down to the core of this team. It's Adam Fox, it's Artemi Panarin, it's Mika Zibanejad, it's Chris Kreider, it's Igor Shesterkin. Those 5 guys, that's the core of this team. If they play well, this team can beat anybody on any night. If they don't play well, this team could be a first-round exit easily. And you'll see more of a Ranger team that we saw in January. That's ultimately what it comes down to. If you're a Ranger fan, you've got to trust this core. Panarin's in the middle of a career year, one of the best seasons we've seen from a Ranger in the history. Igor's hot. Right, Mika had a good March. Kreider is probably the most reliable. He's got a lot of playoff experience. Has been very solid in the playoffs as a Ranger. So you trust he shows up. But at the end of the day, if the core shows up, this team's going to win a lot of games. And they have everything it takes to win 16 games and hoist up the Stanley Cup. So number 1, I go Rangers. Number 2 is the Knicks. Right, they've struggled a little bit recently, but once they get healthy, Randall, OG Anunoby, if he ever gets healthy, you've got Jalen Brunson, that core of guys, those 3 guys, what Jalen Brunson can do on the offensive end, and what they can do on the defensive end, specifically OG once he's healthy, what those guys can do, defensively, they can stop any team any night. Offensively, they're solid. They've got some pieces. I know some of the deadline pieces. Bojan, obviously, I thought played a little bit better the other night. Alec Burks hasn't been exactly what the Knicks have hoped of. But at the end of the day, if they're healthy, they were one of the best teams in the NBA when they were healthy prior to all the injuries hitting them a couple months ago. If they're healthy and that defense is playing like we've seen it play at times, similar to the Rangers, the core of that team is playing well. The defense can stop anybody any night, and the offense can do just enough to get the win. Jalen Brunson has turned into a star in New York. He's been a heck of a signing. He's embodied everything the city represents, and I still think he doesn't get enough calls. A lot of Knicks fans would say that. I agree with it. He does not get enough calls. He's a very underappreciated star in the NBA, very underrated. I think it would have to take a deep playoff run for NBA fans to actually recognize what Jalen Brunson has done on a night-in and night-out basis this season, especially with all the moving parts around him, with all the injuries that the Knicks have dealt with this year. But Jalen Brunson playing at a high level, you can make the case he's as good as anybody in the NBA. That's how good he's been in the this year. You can make the case he should be in the MVP conversation. He probably won't be because, well, it's Jalen Brunson. It's the Knicks. Very underrated. But he should be. You have an MVP caliber player on your team, you're going to be in the conversation. Knicks number 2. The reason I separate the Rangers is I just think the Rangers this year have just been better, right? They're at the top of the league. The Knicks aren't. Right, you had a guy, I just think, in terms of that perspective, I think the Rangers are probably more built for it. I also think, too, look, the Knicks, you've got Boston, you've got some of those teams ahead of you. You look at the Rangers, and you can't really say, maybe only outside of Florida, the Rangers can handle almost anybody, right? You trust them against like a team like Philly. They should be able to beat a team like Carolina. I think the only team really in the front of the Rangers is Florida, which post-deadline, they beat Florida. They also beat Carolina post-deadline. So I think that's a part of it, too. You could probably make the case that the Rangers might actually have an easier path than the Knicks would as well, which has something to do with it. So those are the top 2, Rangers, Knicks. It's gonna be fun at the Garden. I think everybody hopes that both teams go far, right? Both teams go far. There's nothing better than warm weather, May. You get into June, if both teams are still playing, the excitement around the city would be through the roof. It would be through the roof. If the Rangers and the Knicks were both in the Eastern Conference Finals, just imagine that. I mean, the excitement. You know, I've talked to a lot of people about this. I've said it on the show. We've gone through a lot of suffering in New York sports. You know, you haven't had a legitimate championship since 2012 with the Giants and Eli Manning, right? Since that point, we've basically gone 12 years without a championship. And really, we've only had 2 years where we were actually in the finals, right? You had the Stanley Cup Finals with the Rangers against the Kings, and then you had the Mets against the Royals in 2015 in the World Series. Really, outside of those two, those are the only 2 other ones. And neither team won, of course. Of course, the Rangers lost in 5. Mets as well, of course, lost as we all know. But this period that we're entering here in New York sports, where you've got the Rangers and Knicks with legitimate chances. The Yankees got Juan Soto, right? As long as Soto and they're healthy, they're going to have a chance. The Jets with a healthy Rodgers and a healthy roster are going to be right in the conversation. Like we could legitimately be in a stretch here where we could witness a couple championships within the next year or so. Really. So, and it's hard. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but for a while now, you could not actually sit up here and say that there is like 4 teams in New York that actually have a legitimate chance to win a championship. In past years, it's been, if this happens, maybe they can do this. No. If these teams are healthy and their core is playing well, any of these teams can win on any given night. So 3, I have the Yankees. I know it's still early. I know last night was ugly. And Stanton, Rizzo, Judge aren't hitting. They need to start hitting. It's only 6 games into the season. But with Juan Soto and Judge, once Judge gets going, which I have full trust that he will, and hopefully Stanton and Rizzo start getting going. You've seen what Volpe can do. You've seen what Oswaldo can do. You get Garrett Cole back. You also got to realize this team doesn't have Jason Dominguez right now. They'll get Jason Dominguez back. This team at full strength. We're seeing them right now with a lot of key players not hitting. Like, they're winning games. They've found a way to win 5 of their first 6 games without Stanton, Rizzo, and Judge doing much of anything. Same thing with Verdugo. It's been the kids. It's been Volpe. It's been Oswaldo. It's been Soto. And that's pretty much it. They've also done it with average to below average pitching. Right? Nestor last night was not very good. You get Cole back. Those middle of the order guys start hitting. And you get Jason Dominguez back during the summer. This team at full strength will have a chance to go deep. So Yankees number 3. Number 4, I have the Jets. Again, the reason the Yankees are ahead of the Jets is because the actual World Series will come before the Super Bowl. So the Yankees in front of the Jets just because of the timeline of things, although I think you could actually maybe make the case that the Jets are a more talented roster than the Yankees, but it's tough to say because they're 2 different rosters. It's 2 different sports. It's not like we're comparing Jets-Giants. But the Jets are number 4. You know how I feel about the Jets. I think they should win the AFC East now. This is one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. On paper, it is. If they're healthy, you've got Aaron Rodgers. You have Garrett Wilson. You have Mike Williams. They've rebuilt the offensive line, being in 3 big-time pieces, right? Hall of Fame left tackle, solid guard. Right tackle is well-respected around the room, was solid in 2021. We saw what he did in Baltimore, Morgan Moses. Breece Hall. Defensively, you added Hassan Reddick, one of the best pass rushers in the game over the last 4 seasons. C.J. Mosley. Quincy Williams as your linebacker duo. You have one of the best slot corners, arguably the best slot corner in Michael Carter. Sauce and DJ Reed. You have arguably the best slot corner and the best cornerback in the NFL. And DJ Reed as well. They could probably use some safety help, and another third receiver. But look, this team next year, whatever they do in the draft, rolling into week 1, they will be one of the favorites to do some really, really big things this year. So the Jets are number 4. As long as they have Aaron Rodgers, and I've said this forever now, as long as Aaron Rodgers is playing at a high level, they're going to have a chance to win every single week. I'm not saying they're going to go 17-0. That won't happen. But as long as Aaron Rodgers is healthy and playing, even if it's 75, 80% of Aaron Rodgers, that is the best quarterback we have seen since Fitzpatrick, they will have a chance to win every single week. And that's all you can ask for. So Jets number 4. Now, I'm going to skip 5 and 6 here because I think those you can honestly rotate. 7, I have the Mets, right? They're not going to win anything this year. There's a chance that they don't even hit 500 this year, which would be the first time they go wire to wire under 500 since 1965. So I'll go Mets at 7. The early returns are it's going to be a very, very long year for the Mets. And I'll be honest here, this might be a crazy bold prediction. I would not be shocked if Carlos Mendoza does even make it out of this season. He seems very in over his head. He seems overwhelmed. He seems a little lost. He seems like he is not ready for a big league manager job. He just doesn't. From the early signs that we've gotten, only 4 games, there's 158 to go. But again, that's the beauty of baseball. This is the only sample size we got, and you have to react based on that. The 4 games we've gotten, they're 0-4. They got swept. And all they do is if they lose one of these next two, they lose another series. They're on pace for potentially starting 1-5. They're not hitting. Their pitching outside of Manaea has been meh. There's a lot of problems there. They took a step backwards after last season. Even if they retool in 2025, what is this team really going to look like under this manager? Mets at 7. They're not going anywhere this year. Number 8's the Nets. Last is the Nets. This team's never won an NBA championship. They've won NBA championships, of course, in the 70s. They never won an NBA title. They had the years in the early 2000s with Jason Kidd, and those runs where they were able to get there, couldn't finish. At the end of the day, they're last. I mean, they're one of the worst teams in the NBA. They can't score. They don't have a coach, right? They fired Jacques Vaughn. They're going to look at a new coach this offseason. I know people want to say, oh, Donovan Mitchell, maybe he'll come to Brooklyn. I don't see that happening. I don't see this team going after another star. It's going to be a couple years of really, really bad basketball. It is basically what we saw with Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. Right after those years, there was about 8-9 years of one of the worst teams in the NBA, arguably the laughing stock of the NBA. It's the same thing we're living through again. They tried to build a super team. It didn't work. This is going to be a multi-year rebuild. The Nets are not going to sniff an NBA title for a while. I mean, they may not even win it. I mean, winning a championship is hard, let alone when you're a little brother and a team that has been so bad for so long. You don't trust this front office. You don't have a coach. The roster's awful. I know you have some young pieces and Bridges, and look, the Nets stink. They're not even going to make the playoffs this year. There's a good chance they might not even make the playoffs again next year. They're awful. There is no path. There is no direction with that franchise. Zero direction with the Brooklyn Nets. They're last. So back to 5 and 6. I put the Islanders at 5, Giants at 6, which is tough. Because if the Giants hit on a quarterback, and they find a receiver as well, they could be in the conversation. I don't think they'll be in the conversation this year. It's interesting because the Islanders and the Giants are heading in two different directions. Like the Islanders are ending their window, nearing the end of their window that they're in right now, right? This window where they got to the 2 Eastern Conference Finals. One of them they got to Game 7. Of course, against Tampa, back-to-back seasons, all of that stuff. So it's like part of it's like the Islanders, they're ending their run. Like they're nearing the end of this run they've had with this core of players. They're getting old. They're not the same team. They're not even in the playoffs right now. They're fighting for a spot. When you look at the Giants, they're like in the middle of a rebuild. They're trying to get a little younger. They're probably going to take a rookie quarterback. They're probably going to draft a quarterback. They're going to retool. It might be a year or two, and then they'll get back to probably, trying to win again, right? So it's interesting. Both these teams are heading in the opposite direction. One team is going with the young youth movement, trying to find their answer, trying to stay competitive, get back into the conversation, while another team is old and just about to have to enter a rebuild. So really you can interchange these two. I don't think either of them are going to win a championship anytime soon, really. I really think out of this list, it's the top 4 teams. It's the Rangers, Knicks, Yankees, and Jets have the most realistic shot. Now, look, the Islanders, the only reason I put the Islanders at 5 is because they're 3 points out of a playoff spot, right? They have a chance to make the playoffs. You get to the playoffs, or 1 point out of playoff spot, rather. You get to the playoffs, anything can happen. I'm not saying they're going to win the cup. They're not. They probably will be a first-round exit like they were last season. But the fact is they could be a playoff team. I don't see the Giants being a playoff team. This year, the Islanders are 1 point out. They have a chance. That's why I put the Islanders at 5. So, again, Rangers 1, Knicks 2, Yankees 3, Jets 4, Islanders 5, Giants 6, Mets 7, Nets 8. If you're an Ets fan, you feel good about the Jets. You should feel terrible about the Mets. And you should feel terrible about the Nets. Fortunately, I guess, sort of, I'm not a full Ets fan. I'm a Jets, Yankees, Nets, Rangers fan. So, for the people out there that are the gym fans or potentially like that, the Jets, Islanders, Mets, or if you're a Jets, Mets, Nets fan, I'm sorry. That is a lot of pain. But at least the Jets should turn things around. But for me, Jets, Nets, Yankees, Rangers, Rangers, Jets, I feel good about. Nets, they stink. They're awful. There are not many other words to use to describe. They are terrible. Watching them is like watching paint dry. It's just they play a boring brand of basketball. They're not any good. So that's the top 8. 8 teams in New York. Number 1, the Rangers. Number 8, the Nets. And everybody else falling in between. So that'll do it. Like I mentioned last night, Yankees fall to the Diamondbacks. Middle of the order, didn't do much hitting. Nestor wasn't very good again. Similar to his first outing, had some struggles early on, was able to bounce back, give him some length, but still not good enough. The Mets got rained out, so the Mets will have 2 games the next 2 days. They'll face the Tigers again today, although it's raining again in the New York, New Jersey area. It's been raining every single day. Monday, Tuesday, today, and I believe it's going to rain again tomorrow. Like, it's been raining every single day. So I don't even know if the Mets will get the game in tonight. Either way, if they do get the game in tonight, or maybe the game already got postponed tonight. Did it? I don't know. They have a doubleheader. Never mind. So they do have a doubleheader tomorrow. So tonight the game got postponed. It just happened here during the podcast, 1:30. The game just got postponed. So they will have a doubleheader tomorrow. So the Mets don't even play tonight. So that's that. The Yankees do play against Arizona. Rodon versus Morel Kelly, 3:40 start, rubber game. Finish up the 7-game road trip to open up the season, and then Friday they'll be home opener against the Blue Jays, and hopefully that is hopefully the weather's better for that. The opening of the season in the Bronx. So that'll do it for the episode of the Bubbs on Sports podcast. As always, stay tuned. A lot more content coming your way. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.